Okay, are we ready?
Ready?
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session on Supported Decision Making 101. My name is Denise Lugo Fowler, and I am the Director of Training and Outreach at Disability Rights New Jersey, and I'm thrilled to be the host this afternoon's session. I will be monitoring the chat and supporting our speaker during this session. Just a couple housekeeping items, just if you can keep your microphones on mute during the session. And this way we can just limit some of the distractions during the presentation. Also, please feel free to pop in any questions in the chat. And we want this to be an engaging discussion. So we encourage everyone to ask questions and share information. Captions are available for anyone who needs them. Just across the bottom on the Zoom menu, you will see the button CC, live transcript. Press that button and you will have the transcript available for you. Also, if you experience any technical issues, please put the question in or the information in the chat and I will try to address it. Hopefully I can resolve the issue for you. And with that, those are all the housekeeping items. So please join me in welcoming our speaker, Michael Brower, who is the managing attorney for our community inclusion team at Disability Rights New Jersey. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. I appreciate the introduction and welcome everybody for the noontime session on supported decision making. I see we have a pretty small crowd, so feel free if you'd, like to unmute yourself, take yourself on video. This is a roundtable discussion, and with a crowd of this size, we can actually really have a true roundtable. So I'm really going to encourage you, if you're not, well, heck, I'm on video. So if I'm on video and I'm having, the looks that I have, you all can be on video too. So I encourage you to put yourself on video, take yourself off mute. We can have this be a little bit more of a dynamic discussion rather than a one-way presentation. Lecturing is not my strong suit. I tend to do it anyway, and it's boring. If you are looking for a lecture on supported decision making, I am putting in the chat a link to a full webinar that I've presented a few different times in a few different venues. But there's a nice clean recording up on Disability Rights New Jersey's website now. I put that link in the chat if you want to go and view that later, or if you've seen it before, you can refer back to it on supported decision making at a basic level, how it works in New Jersey, and a few alternatives to guardianship. So just by way of background, a lot of the names on here, I think some of you guys know me. If you don't, I'm Michael Brower. I am a managing attorney at Disability Rights New Jersey. As Denise mentioned, I manage our community inclusion team. We focus on all different kinds of legal issues that affect people with all different kinds of disabilities who live in the community, their own home, potentially a group home or an apartment, a family home, things like that. And one of those issues is guardianship, because guardianship affects decision making. And one of the ways that people with disabilities can better exercise their right to make their own decisions is through supported decision making. I have a few slides just to get us warmed up, but then I do really want to focus on a roundtable discussion and have people share their experiences, tell their stories. I've got a few poll questions that maybe will get the conversation going. So let me get that underway while everybody gets themselves into talking shape. If you go and review that recording that I linked to, you're going to see that there were 3 big learning objectives. What is supported decision making? And from a legal perspective, differentiating between supported decision making and guardianship under New Jersey laws. And then we talked about 3 different kinds of powers of attorney, which are a pretty common alternative to guardianship. They could be part of a supported decision-making arrangement. They could be done completely independently. We talked about with some detail. But for our purposes, and again, for warm-up sake, think of supported decision-making as the same mechanism that people with or without disabilities use all the time when they look for some kind of input to either understand a problem that's been presented to them, to understand the factors in making a decision when a problem has been presented to them, or to communicate a decision once it's been made to the outside world. A very common example, it's one that most of us in New Jersey can relate to, is car trouble. If you have car trouble, unless you are yourself a mechanic or a hobbyist, you probably turn to a trusted friend or mechanic who's paid to help you understand what's wrong with your car, whether it's worth fixing it, whether it's time to move on and find your next vehicle. And if it is time to find that next vehicle, then maybe get some opinions. What's reliable? What's in your budget? What's the one that's going to serve your needs the best? If you need to tow a boat, if you just need to get back and forth on a commute, whether you want a hybrid or a gas car, you might turn to an expert in vehicles to help you with that. That's a form of supported decision-making, and it doesn't depend on you having a disability to use it. That's really my truncated version here for today to help us kind of get that frame of reference, getting information about making a decision where maybe you don't have all the information. You need to make it independently. In that context, your mechanic or maybe your gearhead sister, they're not the ones who decide whether to fix your car or whether to go buy a new car or which new car you go and buy, but they help you get some input. Maybe they go with you to the dealership and help you communicate with the car salespeople. But they're not the people who ultimately make a decision. Yes, I want that new Honda pickup truck. They're the ones who help you communicate, yes, this person wants a new Honda pickup truck. They want the silver one. They want four-wheel drive, those kinds of things. I use this picture as a pretty good demonstration that, again, it does not depend on disability for somebody to use supported decision-making. The President of the United States, somebody who we would generally agree is somebody who has the trust of a lot of the nation, uses support, regardless of your political affiliation, uses support to make every decision. They have a formal cabinet of supported decision supporters around them. This is good to illustrate the point that supported decision-making can be formal, like the president's cabinet, or it could be informal. Even the president of the United States may just call on a trusted friend or a spouse or a doctor or an expert in a particular field who's not part of the formal network of supporters to help make a particular decision. Again, the buck stops with the president of the United States. In a supported decision-making world, the buck stops with the person who is deciding themselves. The cabinet members don't get to overrule the president and make decisions for them. The president can do the other way around and overrule his supporters or her supporters to make a decision. It's important to remember, and you have to hold on to your wallet. If you hear somebody say, I am a supported decision maker for somebody else. In a real supported decision-making arrangement, that's not how it works. You don't make decisions for somebody else. You help that person make a decision. Well, I want to take a second here, and I want to get our first poll up on the screen. Who has logged in as ATAC number 6? That is not me.
I did as moderator.
Denise, could you put the first poll up on the screen, please?
Sure. Apparently I can't.
We've all been handcuffed. See, we're not decision makers in this situation.
Give me a moment. Let me see if I can figure it out with Naomi and Mike.
Okay, we'll put the poll on pause for a second, and we'll do some more of the warm-up slides while we get that figured out. The other big point, and it's a takeaway that we can get in a nutshell here, is that supported decision-making, though it's often referred to as an alternative to guardianship, isn't exclusive. Somebody with a guardian can still participate in a supported decision-making scheme. In fact, the statutes in New Jersey make it very clear that if you are appointed as a guardian for somebody else, you must participate in a supported decision-making scheme. They do not use those words. The legislature didn't know about supported decision-making when they wrote the laws for guardianship, but they did make it mandatory for guardians to include the person that they are a guardian for, to include them in the decision-making process to the maximum extent possible. And even if that person who they're the guardian for doesn't understand the decision or doesn't have the capacity to make particular decisions, the guardian has a job to help them develop or regain capacity in those areas where the guardian normally makes decisions for them. So that's very similar and really an analog to supported decision-making, right? We're talking about a guardian who has a statutory obligation to include the person who the court has already made a finding does not have the capacity to make decisions for themselves. The guardian has a job to pull them into decisions, teach them, train them, help them develop that skill because we would all know, right? When we were kids, we didn't make good decisions because we didn't have the experience or the chance to make those decisions or to be involved in them. If our parents helped us by pulling us in as children to talk about household finances, to talk about medical decision making, to talk about personal and social decision making. Those are the chances that we got to get little glimpses and to start to develop our skills in order to make decisions. If we were never given the chance to make a decision or to be involved in them, it would be awfully difficult for us to make decisions ourselves anyway. And that's why I use this Venn diagram to show that there is an overlap, that even for people with guardians, supported decision-making should be part of the process. For people without guardians, again, I think that's probably all of us, with or without a guardian, with or without any kind of a disability, we probably use some form of supported decision-making on a daily basis. The only little slice, and I really put this outside of the oval over here, is this little slice of guardianship where maybe somebody can't express an opinion. Potentially they are nonverbal. They may be in a comatose state where there's no way that they can express any kind of opinion on what they want, what they don't want, or to receive language in a way to help understand a decision. There is a slice of people out there that probably cannot communicate a preference. And they are the small slice of people with guardians who probably are not participating in supported decision-making arrangements, but it's a pretty small slice. I'm going to put this contact information up, and I was actually remiss in not thanking the Council for Developmental Disabilities for the financial support they provided to make this session possible. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do these sessions, and disability rights would not be able to participate in the way we did with this summit. So special thanks, and I see Mercedes is in our session. So thank you, Mercedes, for all of your work in connecting us and supporting the work that we do here. Our contact information for Disability Rights New Jersey is up on the screen. And the contact information for the council is up on the screen here now too. That's my warm-up slides. I didn't want to take up too much of our session time. It's only 45 minutes with that. If the polls don't work, we're actually a small enough group that we probably don't even need to use the polling mechanism. Not going to happen, Denise.
No, I'm not able to get it. It's still saying that there's someone else, and I checked around with a few staff that might be using it. So
okay, no big deal. I think we're small enough a group. We don't need to use that formal mechanism. We can probably do it. I was preparing just in case we had a bunch of enrollees. So let me ask the first question to the group here and to kind of start the roundtable discussion going. How many of you, and again, I'm really encouraging folks to take themselves off mute and go on video here. That will make a roundtable work all that much better. How many of you have, before signing up for this session, heard of supported decision-making? And do a show of hands. I did, because I did the session. Erin has, Jill has, Susan has. Mercedes, have you heard of it before? Yep, she's giving us a hand. It's great. Okay, Stephanie has as well. Thanks, Stephanie. Barb, what do you think? Have you heard of supported decision-making before today? She's got her hand up. Oh yeah, she's saying for sure. And then I'm curious, how many, oh, ATAC 6, you're here. Who's the mystery person signed in as ATAC 6? We don't know. I'm curious then, among those people who have heard of supported decision-making before, how many of you have used supported decision-making in your own life, where you yourself were the decision maker? I'm raising my hand because I certainly have. Okay, now I'm going to call people, and I'm going to use disability rights staff to help. Jill, start us off. When's the last time that you used some form of supported decision-making, if you could share?
Let's see, probably today. I am trying to decide on priorities for my team. So I'm calling on different experts within our organization. Probably just this morning was the most recent. Calling on people who know more than I do about certain issues and can help me sort of decide on, priorities for our team going forward.
Do You think that's the kind of a decision that if you didn't have those supporters around you to decide, you could decide completely independently?
I don't think it would be the best decision because I really wouldn't have, all the information that I needed in order to make the best decision. Yeah.
Thank you, Jill. Anyone else want to share the most recent time that they've used? Erin, you're up. Go ahead.
During this whole pandemic, I've been taking advice from doctors and specialists and experts in the field. But more recently, someone in my family has had some medical issues. And so we've relied heavily on, the team that we have around that person, the surgeon, their doctors, the nurses. And I definitely don't think I would have been able to make a decision without the input from all of them.
Yeah, that medical decision-making is a really common one where, again, unless you have medical training yourself, and even if you do, a lot of, in today's medicine world, people are specialists for the most part. Even if you do, you're going to call on people that you know to help you decide, well, what other facts do I need to know here? Have I tried all the physical therapy before I elect to go for surgery? Is the surgery likely to work? Has anyone actually gone through it and could tell me? Maybe it's not a medical professional you call, maybe it's somebody else who's gone through it. For some people, they might have a religious or spiritual basis to make decisions like that, and they'd want to confer with maybe a member of their church or a pastor or deacon, some kind of a spiritual leader to help them decide how that element of their life might guide them to decide. It's pretty common for people like that to call on different members of the community. I'm curious, and again, without prying into the medical world that you guys are going through, did you reach out to any non-medical professionals while you were talking about the different decisions that you might have to make?
Definitely, my husband, it's for our son. So my husband, my mother-in-law, my family, they're all part of our support system as well. So we kind of came to a decision together, talking to the doctors and then deciding, what route we want to take.
Yeah, and that's a pretty common one too. A lot of times you'll hear folks talk about even just talking with their family members, just to have a sounding board sometimes and to say things out loud, to see how that sounds and to kind of maybe wrestle with tough decisions that are in front of you. I can speak for myself. When I have to make a decision all by myself, and it almost never happens I'm almost always seeking some level of support to make any kind of decision, whether it's at work or my personal life. That first time when you're trying to wrestle with a decision by yourself can be some of the most anxiety producing elements of decision making, where you're just in your own head and maybe you can't get to an answer. Maybe it doesn't seem like there is any good answer. And then as soon as you start talking with somebody else about it, that really brings in some support. You can hash it out and say, I do have some paths here. I'm gonna see, Susan, you're unmuted. Do you have something to share with us?
I'm not very good at any kind of financial planning and budgeting, and a couple of members of my family are, and so we actually had a sort of discussion about what the best thing to do was only a couple of days ago. And, it really felt great because I was pulling on their strengths. And, sometimes they come to me for questions about things that I maybe know a little bit about. But on this occasion, this is really a weak area for me. So it was really helpful getting their input.
So I think that everything we've talked about and a couple of examples around the table so far that have come up where people have used supported decision-making for themselves, from the lawyer's perspective, those sound like informal supported decision-making arrangements, right? A problem came up, a family member has a medical problem, you need to help them decide, or it's a child who needs you to decide for them, or it's a personal problem, financial issues that come forward, you need seeking some advice. Your network for supports came up kind of naturally and in the moment. You didn't have it necessarily written down on paper. I'm curious if anybody here would say that they have a formal supported decision-making arrangement, where it's written down on paper that someone will help you make a decision in particular circumstances where you've had some kind of arrangement laid out and written it down? I'm gonna raise my hand. I have one, but I'm gonna wait and see if anyone else does. Jill does.
Yeah, I do too. Just thought about one.
I'll save mine for a second. Does anyone else want to go first and talk about what their formal supported decision-making arrangement might be?
Mine's a healthcare power of attorney in the case that I'm not able to make my own healthcare decisions. I've given that responsibility to my husband.
That's exactly what I had in mind. That is a very common formal supported decision-making arrangement. And nowhere on that paper probably does it say supported decision-making, because in New Jersey, we don't have a statute or rule that says you need to label it that way. But a lot of people, and I'm going to take a little side note to get on a soapbox, but before I do, a lot of people have those kind of arrangements where they've designated a spouse, a parent, a child who's an adult, or a sibling, or a trusted friend to be a healthcare proxy or a healthcare power of attorney. Or maybe they've even just written an advance directive out, whether that's for medical care, whether that's for psychiatric care, whether that is for something in between, where they've written down, if I'm in a bad spot and I can't express what my wishes will be for treatment or medicine or what have you, life support, here's what I want. So that later on, when I can't tell you, you all can look. I've documented what I want. I don't want to be kept alive on life support for more than 2 weeks. I don't want experimental treatment. I do want, pain medication or comfort care to make sure that I'm not in pain or struggling if I'm at the end of life. Those are pretty common. And my little soapbox I'm going to hop up on here is that if you do not have an advance directive, healthcare proxy, or power of attorney, do it now. It doesn't matter. Again, this is not a disability specific issue. You could step out of your front door and a tree could fall and hit you in the head. And all of a sudden you may not be able to make decisions for yourself anymore. You may not be able to speak. You may not be able to sign or use a communication device right away. It may be a long time before you're able to communicate again. And there's a lot of healthcare that you might need, or people might think you need or want in the meantime. By documenting your wishes or designating somebody else to step in and help communicate the decisions that you would make for yourself in that time period, can be invaluable. It could be the difference between you being, allowed to pass away or being kept alive on life support. And you may have a preference really strongly, one way or the other, informed by all of your personal values. But if it's not documented, if there's not somebody designated to make those decisions or to communicate those decisions for you that you've already made for yourself, your wishes might not get honored in that moment. And that can really be a tragedy. So if you don't have a healthcare power of attorney, a healthcare proxy, or an advance directive, they are free. You don't necessarily even need a lawyer to draft one, even though I'm a lawyer and I want to drum up business for all my colleagues. You don't need a lawyer to do it for you. The New Jersey Department of Health has a free form that you can go online. It's very easy. It won't take very long at all. The only real piece of advice I would give on that is that you want to make sure that if you're designating a proxy or a power of attorney to make a decision for you, they should be in the loop. They need to know that you've designated them. And they also need to know what your wishes are, because it's not your decision if they get surprised all of a sudden and say, hey, by the way, you're Michael's proxy or healthcare power and he's in a coma right now. We need to make some decisions about what he wants for himself. And you have no idea because you and I have never had that conversation and you're taking a wild guess at what I would want. You're not making my decisions anymore. You're going to be injecting your judgment and what you think is best for me into that mix. And that may not be what I think I want for myself. So it's my little side note on a soapbox. I'm curious if anybody, we've been talking generally and not with regard for disability so far. I'm curious if anybody in the loop is either a family member of a person with disabilities, or maybe provides services to people with disabilities, or maybe identifies themselves, if they're comfortable saying so, as a person with disabilities themselves. Anybody in that world that could identify as such? Mercedes gives us the thumbs up. Thanks, Mercedes. And I'm curious then, if you are in that world, if you find yourself either in the position of being part of somebody's supported decision-making network, maybe formal or informal, or have worked with somebody with a disability who has a supported decision-making arrangement, again, formal, written down on paper, or maybe informal, where just they kind of, whip it up when they need it.
Hi, Michael. So, I am actually the guardian of my daughter as a result of a period of time when she was in a coma, a long period of time, about 15 months. So I did become her guardian. I regret that now, but it was what was necessary at the time. That's why supported decision making is something that we do regardless, because guardianship does not mean you're making decisions, as you kind of even alluded to. It's still understanding what she wants, and she makes most of the decisions. And when needed, I might have to make a decision because she's not able to. But I do think it's important to note the difference and, understand that without that guardianship paper, it doesn't mean that you cannot be active in supporting the individual in decisions, just like you laid out earlier.
Yeah, I think quite the opposite, right? I think that actually gives you a duty, not just to make decisions when decisions are presented to you, but to really involve that person, find out what they would want for themselves, include them in the decision-making process to the extent that you can. When you're in the guardianship framework, I think you have that real duty to include that person that you're working for, because you are working for them in that situation. You've been appointed by the court to be their guardian, to protect them. But that also does involve protecting their right to decide too. So thank you for sharing that, Mercedes. I think that's important to get some perspective. Elena, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Thank you, everybody. This is very, very enlightening. So in the world of psychiatric disabilities, there is something called the Psychiatric Advance Directive. And I am a representative for several people with their Psychiatric Advance Directive, which does not give me the authority to make a decision for them if they are in any sort of crisis or can no longer make a decision. What it does is that I have signed off as to be their representative if they have so chosen for me to make a decision, which that document is filled with their choices, what they would like to see happen if in fact they are in a crisis where they can no longer no longer have either the capacity to make a decision for themselves, or due to the nature of the crisis, they can't make the decision for themselves. Which again, it could go two ways. If I am signed off as the person to make that decision for them, they would be leaving some of that up to me, but only after lengthy discussion about what they would want for themselves. The other way to sign off as the representative, which in a couple of them I am that, is to just be the bearer of that document for them and say, I am here as this person's representative to make sure that you are following the direction of this document that they have prepared with assistance from probably many people. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a really good example. And again, that's the kind of a thing where if you even have an inkling, and anybody, right? There's not a planned set of folks who will have some kind of a mental health condition, and you don't know when or where. It can happen anytime to anybody. Doesn't discriminate. But especially if you have a history and you know that it's something that could happen to you, having some kind of advanced directive or psychiatric advanced directive to designate, look, here's medication that I know I do poorly with. If you prescribe me Ativan, it's going to be bad for me. If you prescribe me this, that, or the other, right, that's going to interact poorly with my particular body and my chemistry. And I know, an advanced doctor, I want to tell you, do not prescribe that to me. I do not want to take it, because in the moment when I'm in crisis, I may not be able to communicate that, or you may not trust it when I communicate to you because I am in crisis. And that's a tool. That advanced directive is a tool that you can use, and having that supporter and the designee that go with it, right, to come and help advocate for your wishes is another form of supported decision making, very formalized, right, following a designated tool in writing with signatures and a representative who's appointed. But again, right, Elena, I think you would agree, you're not substituting your judgment in those circumstances. You're using the individual's own determinations that they have previously communicated to you.
Absolutely. I'm
Yeah.
absolutely just supporting them there. Mhm.
Exactly, you're supportive. I'm curious then if anyone, we've heard from a couple of folks who are involved as supporters, family members, or even court-appointed guardians who still use supported decision-making as the model that they use to decide, even with their court role. Anybody who's involved as a service provider for people with disabilities, anywhere from in the medical field, providing healthcare, maybe, day-to-day functional activities. Anybody like that in the audience by any chance? Hey, Erin, go ahead.
So a big issue that we're coming across right now, and I work closely with self-advocates, is that we have a lot of people who have guardians, and the guardians are maintaining all the power. The advocate is expressing what they want, what they need, and they're not getting that support from their guardian. It's kind of like they're still treated as children, is my way, and that's it, even though they're in their 60s. And we are having a really hard time trying to circumvent that. We're teaching advocacy, we're teaching to speak up for yourself, we're teaching to be respectful when you do speak up for yourself, but that's kind of where our limits end. And so do you have any advice for, we give them DRNJ as a resource, and we give out, the DDS guide as resources as well, but legally their hands are tied and they can't do anything. I've had people who get their phone taken away as punishment, and they're not allowed to watch TV, and they have a curfew at home, even though they don't live with their parents, they're living independently, but these are the rules that are instilled on them. And it's frustrating.
Yeah, that sounds frustrating. And I think if I were subject to that as an adult, I would be frustrated too. And I think that if I found myself just trapped, you might throw your hands up at some point and say, well, geez, I don't have any control over my life anymore. That's not a good way to live, I don't think. And if you think in terms from a lawyer's perspective, the disclaimer goes, I don't usually give out legal advice. I don't give out legal advice in public forums like this, and I won't here today either. But there's a couple of interesting bits of information that would probably help inform, if you're helping self-advocates, inform people of what their rights are. So first off, the New Jersey State Constitution enshrines a right to self-determination in the first article. It is cooked right into the document that makes our state different than Pennsylvania, Maryland, New York, Washington State, I pick any other state in the union. It's cooked right in. It's one of the first things that the founders of our state said, is that people who live in New Jersey have a fundamental right to self-determination. We have a right to life, to liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And it's not something that you find in the United States Constitution, right? That the mention of those rights exists in those federal documents, but it's not an article of the Constitution that says individuals have that right. So we have that here. And because it's in the Constitution, our Supreme Court is guided by it. And there have been a couple of different court decisions that talk about people's right to self-determination. And because the Supreme Court has talked about that in decisions they've made specifically in terms of guardianship, that's where we have a lot of the law that we can lean on and find, where do people's rights stop and where do they start? If you're not in the guardianship world yet, it's very, very fuzzy. It's very much on a case-by-case basis. You kind of feel the edges of where someone's decision-making authority will lie. But generally, the assumption is someone who hasn't been found to need a guardian or have what's called incapacity decides for themselves. That's the presumption. If you're in the guardianship world, there's a very specific mechanism that the court has set up, kind of sifting everything down, right? We start with the Constitution, the big thinking, and Supreme Court, right, in their big chamber down in Trenton, they think about those kind of things, but that stuff, it siphons down into court rules that specifically lay out, if you are a person who is subject to guardianship and you disagree with your guardian, there's a mechanism you can use to challenge the guardian's decision. And it's not terribly formal. I'm very rarely going to send somebody into court and not tell them it's a good idea to have an attorney. It's almost always a good idea to have a lawyer when you go into the courtroom. But the court does have a process where somebody could, in as simple a format as writing a letter to the judge, say, Judge, I've got a problem with my guardian. They are taking away my right to communicate by my phone. They're stifling my ability to socialize by giving me a curfew. And I'm a 65-year-old woman and I want to go date. Right? I just want to go see people, or I just want to hang out with my friends at the bar, or I want to go bowling and the bowling doesn't start till 9:30, right? Or whatever it is. Somebody could seek court review of their guardian's decisions. There's also a mechanism if a guardian was really failing to meet their obligations. And I've seen cases that range from just, really stifling someone's ability to participate in their own life and have some level of self-determination. At all the way down to the bad part of the spectrum where you see guardians who abuse that power. Maybe they're verbally abusive, maybe they're physically abusive, and they're using their status as guardian to continue the abuse. And it's really sad, it's really frightening. And there's not a lot of active oversight by the courts, but there is a method for somebody like in that situation to reach out to the court and say, court, you ultimately hold the keys to my guardianship. You're the one who appointed this guardian for me. They're acting in your name and they're doing a bad job at it. Either they're making a bad decision in this one particular instance, or overall they're failing as a guardian for one reason or the other. Court, I want you to review my guardianship. Let's call everybody into court and let's figure this out. Or somebody might say, I don't need a guardian anymore. I've regained my capacity. Maybe I was 18 years old, or maybe I was in a coma when my guardianship was instituted. And that's not the case anymore. I no longer need somebody to make decisions. I can manage my own affairs. There's a mechanism to get into court. And again, it doesn't have to be fancy or formal, but if you have a lawyer, they'll shepherd you through. I'm happy to, if someone has a particular question, they want to come through intake, I can provide specific advice. And our intake information is on that last slide. You can always just go to disabilityrightsnj.org for an intake form. But there's mechanisms to have the court review that, is the bottom line. There is a prescribed mechanism to remove a guardian when somebody has regained capacity. It's basically the reverse of how you got into guardianship. To get in, you need 2 doctors to sign off that you lack the capacity to govern yourself or manage your affairs. To get out, it's the exact same thing but backwards. 2 doctors need to sign off that you now have the capacity to manage yourself and to govern yourself and manage your own affairs. And guess what? We're in a supported decision-making forum. Supported decision-making could be a tool where if you have arranged in a way that's either formal or informal, a support network around you so that maybe, you have an intellectual disability and maybe when it comes to finances, you just really struggle with managing your money, but you have a trusted person in your network who can help you make sure your checkbook is balanced, make sure the bills are paid, make sure your Social Security benefits, your other government benefits are coming in on time. Maybe that's as formal as having a representative payee or a trustee, or maybe it's informal, it's a parent or a friend or relative. That may be evidence that you could present to the court with the sign off of those 2 doctors. I can manage my own affairs. Look, here's how I manage it. I don't know the first thing about money, but the first time I get a bill, I call mom, or I call my brother, or I call my accountant who's paid to help me. Doesn't have to even be like, friendly person who's volunteering. It could be somebody who's paid to help you do it. Because plenty of us use paid support to get through life. Attorneys, accountants, doctors, those folks all get paid for the support they provide. So that's definitely within the realm. So hopefully, Aaron, I answered your question, and it was a really good trigger for that last point, which I think it's a point that I make in that presentation, but it's good to reiterate here, is that there is a pathway out of guardianship, and support decision-making can be a tool that you use to help bolster that case. Of course, there's always contests. Sometimes people will fight back and say, no, no, no. And of course, there's always the kind of default protection paternalistic view that the court might take and say, well, you've got a disability. I don't know. It feels like if we give you the decision-making power, that could be bad. That exists. It's reality. But if the case is prepared well, if there's a lot of support, especially if things are formalized, you might increase your odds if you're a person with a disability to make sure that you, even despite the fact that you have a guardian, can exercise still your right to self-determination.
Yeah, thank you so much. I wrote everything down. It was very helpful. And I got the link from the chat as well.
Excellent. And thank you, Jill and Denise, for dropping that link into the chat. That's excellent. Jill put in a link in the chat to supporteddecisionmaking.org. That's a website that's maintained by the DC Quality Trust. If you've ever heard of Jenny Hatch, she's really the poster person for restoration of legal capacity. She's a young woman who has Down syndrome, had a guardian, really didn't need the guardian, and fought her way through I believe it was the Virginia courts to get her guardian removed and to get her ability to decide for herself restored by the courts. She really kind of triggered this particular movement, and supporteddecisionmaking.org is a place that you can go, absolutely chock full of resources, as Jill mentioned. Model supported decision-making agreements. If you wanted to see, templates, how one might look in New Jersey, you can really make it look however you want to, but if you just want to get a head start and see what they might look like, there are resources, scholarly articles, there are doctors on there who have done evaluations for people who maybe use supported decision-making or have a guardian but don't really need one. I mean, the resources are really endless. They have a conference every year that's dedicated to the idea of supported decision-making. I've attended. It's absolutely fantastic. Again, inspiring from a basic sense, but then gets into the technical, the legal, the medical, every kind of area of decision-making is addressed. It's a good organization, a good website to visit if you're at all interested in this.
It covers all the states. So to the extent we have anybody in this session that's, not from New Jersey, is from another state, you can still find what you're looking for in that link.
Yeah, that's
Michael, there's a question in the chat. I just didn't want to run out of time because this is actually something I've seen too that has come up here. And the question is, what if my doctors will not complete a medical procedure unless I get a guardian?
Ooh, that is a great question, Carrie. A good one indeed, and that is something that Jill, I think this has come up with disability rights over and over again.
The same one, yeah.
Yeah, this has come up over and over again for us. So it's a really common problem. That's usually somebody who uses supported decision making, again, formal or informal. That's usually what happens is they'll run into a speed bump at some point. Somebody will challenge them, even if the court has never been involved in their life. They've never been declared to be incapacitated. Maybe doctors have never signed those certifications that say that they lack capacity, and then that triggers the guardianship process. Even then, at some point they run into a speed bump and somebody says, well, I see that you've got Down syndrome, or I see that you have autism, or some other developmental disability, or some other diagnosis, or maybe something visible about your disability, like you use a wheelchair. And believe it or not, in 2021, that still happens. I was just talking to a client the other week. I met with him, and his doctor said, well, I see that you use a wheelchair, and I think that means that you lack the ability to decide about this very important medical procedure. And it's like, wow, that seems like something that we should have figured out decades ago, but we're still doing it. When that happens, there's a couple of things. Well, first of all, if you're working with that doctor and that's how they treat you, if you have the option to find another doctor, well, that's, one of the things that you might want to consider. But, we don't live in the Wild West when it comes to disability discrimination. And I think I would probably put that kind of a thing in that pot of disability discrimination. We have the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's been in the books for more than 30 years now. It's been active that whole time. It is illegal for places of public accommodation, including doctors' offices, to discriminate against people with disabilities because of their disability. And doctors are required to get informed consent, but just like they may have to build a ramp in the front of their office so that their patients who use a wheelchair can roll in the front door and that's accessible to people who use wheelchairs, other accommodations are also required by the ADA. Similarly, that we have a law against discrimination in New Jersey, which requires accommodations for people with disability. Places like doctors' offices, lawyers' offices, it's illegal to discriminate and to make your practice inaccessible to people with disabilities. One form of an accommodation might be supported decision-making. Okay, maybe I get the sense that when I ask you questions about informed consent, this is going to be a complicated surgery, there's complicated side effects, and for some reason, maybe I'm getting the sense that you don't understand. I would hope that the doctor would be able to accommodate by speaking in terms that are accessible to people and not talking in medical jargon. Because if you start talking to me about, fibromyalgia and neurosyncopathy, like I don't know what any of these things means. I'm probably not pronouncing them right. I would hope they would say, oh, well, what we have is like a problem of your nerves. And it's kind of like a wire and it's broken. If we do the surgery, we're going to plug them back together. Might go well, might not work. Michael, what do you think? Is that a surgery you want to go through, right? That's breaking it down and making your language accessible. It might be pulling in supports. Is there somebody who can help you understand this process? Maybe you have somebody in your network who you would choose to bring in, family member, friend, relative. Maybe you've got a best buddy who's a nurse and understands some of this medical jargon or what the medications we're talking about are and could help advise you on this so that you can decide. Those are the kind of accommodations. So I would have to say that for that doctor who's saying, we're not going to treat you because you have a disability, and I think you have to go through this very restrictive court process, I would hope that before they even get there, they've had a conversation about how can we make this accessible so that you can give your informed consent to a medical procedure, which is a requirement and a prerequisite for medicine in New Jersey and in most other states too. So I'm looking at the clock, Denise. I think I'm about on the end of my time here.
You are, unless, we have another question anywhere. Anyone? Don't see any in the chat. So with that, yes, very informative, Michael. Thank you. Comment that just came in. And with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon, and Michael for the great presentation. Very good information for all of us. And I want to thank everyone for attending the conference. So have a great day and great